Hello, my name is Michael Dant. I am a fourth-generation Seventh-day Adventist who failed to fall in love with Jesus for the first 3 decades of my sincere Christian life. I truly desired to be on fire for the Lord, to relish spending time with Him, and to enjoy consistent victory over sin. But that was not my experience. In fact, I found it difficult to pray for any length of time, and often found myself looking for excuses to shorten or even skip my devotional time in the morning. You know, if we say that we love somebody, but we find ourselves looking for excuses to avoid them, we probably need to reevaluate our love relationship. And that is exactly what happened in my case. Then I began to learn about what it means to surrender to Jesus. And I discovered that it was so much more than I had ever realized. Surrender is radical. It is an all or nothing, all at once experience. Surrender is throwing ourselves with utter abandon into the arms of Jesus. Although I had sung the surrender song and prayed the surrender prayer and meant it, I had always held back just a little bit. I had failed to give God all my choices. But as I learned more about surrender, God worked miraculously to bring me to the place where finally I was ready and willing to give Him all my choices in every area of my life all the time. This unreserved, unresisting, and unrelenting surrender has revolutionized my love relationship with Him. For the first time in my life, I truly relish prayer and experience consistent victory over the chosen sins in my life. This, to me, is one of the greatest miracles that God has ever performed in my life. You know, Ellen White tells us that self-surrender is the substance of the teachings of Christ, and yet somehow I had failed to learn this foundational lesson despite all the spiritual advantages of my childhood. Perhaps my experience sounds familiar to you. Maybe someone you know is struggling in the same way, wanting to be on fire for God, but not knowing how. Surrender is getting out of God's way so that He can be Almighty God in and through us. And yet surrender is so often poorly misunderstood, even today, even among sincere Christians. You know, we all talk a lot about surrender. You hear it from the pulpit, you read it in the written page, but we don't often say much about surrender. What is it? What does it really look like in my life in practical terms? How can I become surrendered? How can I stay surrendered? How can I even know if I am surrendered? These questions are foundational to our love relationship with Jesus. The goal of Delighting Ministries is to provide free resources to Seventh-day Adventist Christians in our journey to understand what it means, in practical terms, to consecrate our lives unreservedly to Jesus. Our ministry offers free Delighting in the Almighty seminars all over the world for churches, camp meetings, schools, youth conferences, and more. On the ministry website, you can find many resources, including an app that makes it easier to learn about surrender individually or in small group settings. God's desire is that we delight in Him. He longs for us to relish Him and to experience His unrestrained power in every aspect of our lives. Only God can accomplish this wonderful miracle in our lives, but only you and I can let Him. That is why surrender is so important. Surrender is the key to letting God be Almighty God in our lives. Learning about surrender is the first step in that process. If you'd like to learn more about surrender and how it works in practical terms, let's get in touch.